She advocates for the forgotten Salvadorans in U.S. jails. San Salvador, El Salvador. APU Carlos thought his life was over when in 1993 a Los Angeles judge sentenced him to 45 years in prison for murder. But after more than 2 decades at the correctional training facility in California, commonly known as Soledad State Prison, he was visited by a fellow Salvadoran woman who gave him hope. Carlos is one of dozens of Salvadorans helped by Eliza Jurado to get out of U.S. jails so they can start a new life in El Salvador, a country hit by poverty and violence, but where she thinks they can move on with help from their families. Carlos asked. Jurado, a 62-year-old Salvadoran sociologist, says she feels the need to advocate for her forgotten compatriots behind bars in California, who she believes deserve a second chance. They are old or sick. The activist says she has helped gain the release at least 200 men since she started aiding them 14 years ago. They need to show Although the situation has improved over the last 3 years, El Salvador, with 6.5 million people, is still one of the most violent countries in the world. In 2015, the most violent year in recent history for the country, 6,425 people died violently. Last year, gangs, however, are still involved in drug trafficking, organized crime and extortion. The 18th Street Salvadoran criminologist Ricardo Sosa thinks having a criminal record in the U.S. would not necessarily prevent these deportees from finding jobs in El Salvador. The inmates who hear about Jurado write her letters. She then meets the package is sent to the Board of Parole Hearings, at California's Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Jurado travels some. A spokeswoman for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation said the department works collaboratively with Jurado but can't talk about her because it needs to remain impartial when it comes to all of their stakeholders. Jurado, who has experience in prison rehabilitation, works for a coffee producer to pay the bills. In 2005 she created ASAPL, the Spanish initials for the Salvadoran Association of Support to Those Who Lack Freedom Overseas. The group is formed. The government of President Mauricio Funes 2009-2014 helped Jurado by giving her transportation to prisons and having consular officials accompany her in her jail visits as well as organizing media events, she said. Jurado was trapped. Help stopped, however, due to a lack of understanding between ASAPL and the government of President Salvador Tinches Cern, who requested logs of ex-prisoners that Jurado considered confidential information. The Salvadoran activist now travels with a tourist visa and says her work has been increasingly difficult. With the meager income, Jurado says she recently handed a letter to the new government of President Nayib Bukele to ask for support. Government spokespeople. Nowadays, relatives of inmates in Los Angeles raise money to pay for Jurado's flights, and Homies Unidos, a group who helps youth stay out of trouble, helps finance her stay, food, and sometimes transportation in the U.S. In September, Jurado plans to see almost 100 prisoners in California and Arizona. One of them is Jose Gil, a 28-year-old Salvadoran who has already served 10 years in California State Prison for murder. Since he committed his crime before turning 18, Jurado plans to ask for a review of his case. She is the only Carlos dreams of having cattle and owning his own home. He says he is no longer the 24-year-old factory worker in California who felt alone in the 1990s and joined a gang to feel he belonged. Things went differently for Luis Ortiz, another Salvadoran Jurado helped release. Ortiz, who spent 25 years in prison for attempted murder, was deported in 2015 but only lasted a few months in El Salvador. He fled to Mexico. Jurado fights. Current Salvadoran Foreign Ministry officials said they don't have information on how many Salvadorans are in U.S. jails. In 2014, Jurado says she's not ready to give up despite a lack of funds. Sometimes. Associated Press writer Claudia Torrens reported this story from New York, and AP writer Marcos Alemán reported in San Salvador.